Brilliant. Okay, so greetings, everybody. Apologies for the small delay, as I said. Thanks for coming, and greetings from a not too bright or not too gloomy, or a bit of a gloomy Glasgow. Wherever you are right now, let me start with a welcome. If you're enjoying the sun or if you're enjoying the rain, it's a pleasure that you've been able to join us today. So welcome to this seminar for the Philosophy of Education Society of Great Britain. We're delighted to welcome Manish Jain today, whose title for his presentation is Reimagining Education. This virtual seminar is hosted by the Strathclyde-Glasgow branch of the Philosophy of Education Society, and my name is David Lewin. I'm from the University of Strathclyde, and I'll be chairing this event. I'll also be ably assisted by the co-secretary, Philip Tonner, who's there also from Glasgow University, as well as Vijayita Prajapati, who is doing a PhD with us at Strathclyde. So thank you so much for coming today. We are especially grateful to Manish for taking the time to join us today and for persisting with the technology. I want to also extend a thanks again to Vijay for helping to make arrangements for this event. So the very brief housekeeping is just to say that, as you will be aware, the seminar is being recorded. Of course, you'll only be heard or seen if you unmute your audio or switch on your video. So please mute your audio unless you need to be unmuted for any reason. The recording will be made public via the video, the PESGB, that's Philosophy of Education Society, YouTube channel. And I thought I would just share with you, if you're not aware of the Philosophy of Education Society's work, I will shove into the chat the link. There we go. So the talk will be about 45 minutes or so, and this will be followed by questions, discussion for around another 45 minutes, I think, or thereabouts. So during the talk, feel free to raise any questions that you want to through the chat tool, or you can save those questions for the Q&A session at the end. Vijay and I will monitor the chat, and Philip will be on the door, so to speak, letting people in if there are late arrivals. We will do our best to ensure that your questions are asked. So if you want to put them in the chat tool, we may invite you to say the question that you ask so that we can all keep up with those questions. So if you prefer, we can just read it out on your behalf. So now it's my pleasure to introduce the speaker. I first came across Manish's work, I suppose, from his appearance in the movie Schooling the World, which is a compelling indictment of attempts to globalize education. And if you haven't seen that film, it's really great. Check it out. I won't read through Manish's extensive and impressive biography. You've already seen that if you saw the advert for this event. Though perhaps I can highlight the fact that his education seems to be properly holistic and ongoing. And as we planned for this event, Manish shared with us a recent publication. Maybe Vijay can share that in the chat tool. Great. Which he may talk about a little bit in his presentation. The publication is called The Future Is Now, the Ecoversities Alliance of Radical Pedagogies, which looks like a fascinating directory of how education might be imagined otherwise. So hopefully the link is in the chat. Yeah, there we go, perfect.
Yes, it's there.
Yeah, great.
It's
so, thank you. I suspect we have a lot to unlearn, so we had better get started. So let me invite Manish to speak on his topic of reimagining education. Over to you.
Yeah, so thank you, everyone. It's a great pleasure to be here. I am right now in Udaipur, India, and about 8:40 in the evening. So I'm glad that everyone could make it today. And I thought I would start by asking you a question. maybe you can put it in the chat box, is so my talk is around reimagining education, and these are really my own journey and experiments with that over the last few decades. And one of the things I talk a lot about is the need for unlearning, which David kind of alluded to. And a lot of the questions and conversations around reimagining education, I think, start with the starting point for me has been around unlearning. And, because if we look at the last probably 100 years of education reform, you can kind of look at it as kind of going around in circles, and the system is more or less still the same. The critiques are still more or less the same. You go back to the work of Gandhi or Tolstoy or many educational thinkers, philosophers. You'll be shocked as how many of those critiques are still relevant today. Tagore, another very important figure in that. So I would like to just ask you just to warm up. One is I'll do 2 warm-ups. So one is just to kind of get your body moving a little bit. We try to just I do usually like to play a lot of games, and so it's a little bit tough on the Zoom, but I think it's really important to activate different intelligences, different wisdom. So I just ask you to wiggle your fingers. Maybe if you guys know laughing yoga, we can laugh out a couple of times. David, I can't hear you. Yeah, and one more time. So good. And so that's one invitation. The second is to maybe put in the chat box, what's one thing you feel that is very important to unlearn if we really want to get into a deep conversation around reimagining education? What's one mindset or framework or fear or something you feel that's important to unlearn to actually start a genuine, deeper process of reimagining education? Yeah, great. Thank you, guys. Modernity, assessment, rigid rules from the past, that capitalism works. Fantastic. Anyone else? Neoliberalization, performativity, Western thinking on autonomy and rationality. Wow, great crowd here. Others? Anyone else? Ungrading, pedagogy, linear thinking. Yep. That learning is work rather than also fun. Traps of certifications. Corporal punishment. Yeah. That we are in a race. Yeah, fantastic. Great. Yeah. So I think, this is I would love to, go deeper into all of these things with you, and maybe some of what you'll hear about in terms of both my journey and experiments. We'll share how we are trying to work on these. I should just confess up front is that, so my a big part of my journey has been to really whatever thoughts and experiments I've had around education, me and my family have been the guinea pigs to start with all of those. And so it's been very important to me to actually engage in this unlearning, and also really experiment. Gandhi used this word in his autobiographies, my experiments with truth. So I think that's been part of my journey, is to actually really try it out on myself. And there is a space for, obviously theoretical explorations, but for me, it's been very important to actually, try it out in the real world. And so let me start a little bit and give a little background on my own journey, because I think that the claims I'm making stem from all of these experiences. And so when I was about 3 years old, I was kidnapped by the American dream. And my parents took me away to the US to pursue the American dream, the promise, the consumer lifestyle, the opportunities, the claim to democracy, freedom, mobility, all of those things that came around with it. And I grew up in suburbs of Chicago. And my childhood was really around, a lot of it was time was spent in shopping malls, playing video games, eating lots of junk food, and then in its own way, kind of trying to resist the oppressive nature of suburban life, and in any way I could. And when I was a student, lots of questions around education started to come up in my own experience. I went to a government school, and I started questioning many things from childhood. One was kind of the labeling and the tracking system, labeling children, as gifted or as failures or as, problem children, and all that, and how tracking started to happen, and who was being tracked, who were in the honors classes, what people, what backgrounds, classes, races were labeled unfairly oftentimes. So that started to disturb me. The competition that was in school, I actually made the mistake of winning a few competitions and then felt very alienated and disconnected from many of my friends, and started to wonder why we set up children in this kind of a competitive framework where there has to be winners and losers. The idea that, certain, the whole question around IQ, what does IQ mean? What is intelligence started to come when I was a student. The pressure around exams and obviously performance and perfection, and also this kind of negation, I think, of much of life experience with the label of extracurricular activities. And so the only thing that ultimately grades your marks, that was really what mattered at the end of the day in terms of success. So that was, I grew up with these kinds of questions, and but somehow, decided somehow to that I would try to play the game. So I understood from childhood that it was a game, really, and that I could kind of game the system, and it was in such a way that I ended up, even without studying much, because I preferred to actually always found more meaning into community service activities, spending time with friends, little startups that I did as a child. Many different things where I felt much more connected to life, I would say. But somehow, I gamed the system in a way that I ended up in Ivy League colleges, and without much study. But those questions, persisted as I went through the system, and probably got even more intense for me. I started basically, I should say my mother is a doctor and my father is an engineer. So there was a lot of expectation on me growing up. And I started to kind of follow one of those professions, and I kind of resisted both of them, and ended up as my first career was an investment banker on Wall Street. And when I was there, lots of questions started emerging around the global financial system and how it actually works. And, how does, in front of me, I saw companies which were, running losses overnight being valued at billions of dollars out of nowhere, and how is that value created, and where does this wealth come from, and how does it move around the planet? And the whole myth of trickle-down economics really hit me when I was there, because I started to understand that the design of the system was really not around trickling down wealth, but actually helping it to gush up and centralize in different ways. So I left that world, and I was really in search of how I could, serve the world, serve the planet, serve humanity. And so I ended up as I thought I would become an academic. So I started my thought I would join a PhD program at Harvard, and started to have a lot of questions there about the knowledge paradigm that was being promoted and pursued. And I started, and one of the things that we were told there was, that the problems of the world are because of the lack of education. And the people who were not educated were really the root of the crisis. And I started to think that, my village grandmothers both had never gone to school, didn't know how to read and write, and started to question, how are they the root of this kind of global crises we're facing? And I thought that, they are really compassionate, kind women. They have really serve their communities. They take care of others. They are intelligent in many different ways. So this whole label of educated and uneducated started to become very something that very much disturbed me and concerned me. And how are these labels being created, and who's creating them, and for what objectives and ends? And what do we there's a saying, the school teacher who brought the pencil also brought the eraser. So what's being made invisible? What's being lost when we go down a certain kind of epistemological framework? And those questions started to disturb me to the point where I really felt that I wanted to, I left that program after 1 year, and decided that, I should try to, again, I asked my friends, what can I do to serve? And they said, why don't you join the UN? So I worked in international development with USAID, the World Bank, the UN systems, UNESCO, UNICEF, for several years, and, started to really look very closely across the world at, the whole development model, and, what was behind it, and obviously schooling being a main feature of that development model. It's kind of in some ways, it's the way to kind of hit people on the head and saying, you need us because, your schooling system is not good, and we're here to educate you and civilize you. And in a sense, a Trojan horse for many other things, which I can get into more later on. But I think, this question of development, progress, who's really developed, what is the good life, all of those things really started to hit me. And I thought that, the larger paradigm in which a lot of development work is situated needed to be much more deeply questioned. And in institutions like the UN, World Bank, were not at all prepared to go into those deeper questions. So I decided to resign from that, and I was really really disillusioned, I would say. I was 28 at the time, and very depressed about what was happening in the world, and being in these powers of center, way decisions were being made and what was happening around that. And so I decided to actually come back to India, and really to see that and basically my wife and I decided to enroll ourselves into our village grandmother's university. And we thought that, what was needed was unlearning, actually, and really the need to start to access a different worldview would be part of the way to for us, both individually and maybe collectively, to start to reimagine a different kind of notion of what both the future as well as the past actually meant. So we set up an organization called Shikshantar at that time, and started to really create a space for all kinds of people who had deep questions about the whole idea of education to start to come and explore. One was to heal themselves from the damage that their schooling did, and so many people who were labeled as dropouts, this I've talked about quite often, even in the film, was that one of the worst crimes against humanity is to label millions of innocent children as failures and as dropouts, and this is something that continues to this day, even though we know better in terms of what constitutes deeper learning. We continue doing that to children. So how people could recover that from that, and how could they also start to think about things like economy and community and spirituality and purpose in a different way than what we had been told was the key or the way to happiness, which was basically getting a good job and working at something for many years and saving up and then and consuming and ultimately you would be happy. And I think anyways we've seen in the last 20 years with things like Bhutan, the gross national happiness and things that whole story has been unraveling, and there's a need probably, if you know about also in Latin America, Buen Vivir, the movement for that. In India, that started much earlier with Gandhi and the freedom struggle in terms of this question of Swaraj. So we really felt that this space to actually explore a different worldview and step out of what we call the monoculture of the mind, first to understand it and then to start to step out of it was really needed. And I would say in terms of our work, there's been really three experiments that we've tried to understand very deeply, or three, you could almost say, disciplines or domains. So one has been this area of unlearning. And so, how do we actually, this conditioning around scarcity or fear or control or planning or labeling or monoculture, all these things, how do we actually start to see it and start to maybe create invitations to unravel or let go some of it. The second is what we call the gift culture. So there's a deep, obviously linkage between education and economy, and to actually and obviously one of the things we've seen is that the more that one studies that, the more dependent they become on the money system and the global economy. And so how do we actually start to envision a different kind of understanding economy and work and livelihood and really even relationships with the rest of nature. So that's been the second thing, and lots of experiments in the gift culture around really, letting go of our fear of money and also, but rebuilding the kinds of fabrics of trust. I remember growing up, there was a very strong push towards, which happened probably, in the 80s with Reagan, was don't trust your neighbors. Became a very big mantra. They may kidnap you or abuse you or things like that. So the kind of but how do we start to reclaim a field of trust and kindness and care seems to be essential to kind of reimagining education, and I also sometimes refer to that as kind of the in my own experience as the exponential power of trust, that many things we don't think that are possible or can't be done, actually when a field of trust is created, you can almost see all kinds of miracles start to happen in terms of collaborations or conversations and even action. And the third thing is what I would call, we have a word in India. I know there's a lot of Indians on this call, but called the Jugaad mind. So the Jugaad mind, Jugaad means improvisation, a playful improvisation. It's figuring out things. You know, there's many different terms. In French, they would say, you know, something akin to bricolage. In English, MacGyvering. But if we assume that, you know, we've reached the end of kind of large-scale utopian planning, and if you haven't reached that, then, you know, I would, you know, that's a whole different conversation. But you know, that how do we start to figure a way out of what we are? How do we start to even bring reimagining from the realm of our imagination to actually our daily lives and our organizations and things? And so a lot of it is around Jugaad, and Jugaad, actually the best Jugaad you see happens when there are situations of constraint. And so a lot of people I've seen, young people have gotten, you know, have had beautiful dreams, but get stuck in this question, oh, I don't have the money right now to do this. I don't have the resources. How do I move forward? So Jugaad is one of those things that, you know, starts to help us pave the way. And what we see is that, you know, it's kind of like the idea of, you know, we make the path by walking it. So rather than saying that we have to have, you know, everything figured out in advance, let's start to Jugaad and figure out what's possible, and new things will open up from that. So these are kind of three disciplines or domains we've explored in our work. The last thing I just want to share a little bit is about one of the experience, which is called Swaraj University. This was started about 10 years ago. And this is what we call self-designed learning. Is kind of our is the way that those three disciplines, I would kind of use this word of self-designed learning, this term, to describe what drives our experiments. And so this is a self-designed learning university, and I have to say, first, it's 100% illegal and uncertified. And when we started it, we printed T-shirts to kind of mock the university system, and saying that, you know, communities, people who have not, who don't have degrees or formal, you know, or PhDs, can actually start to imagine what a university could be for them, even though the universities won't allow them entry. And so we want to be very playful with the idea to kind of open, you know, again, as a way to open the imagination. And so we call the learners Kojis. Koji means seeker. And so this is another tradition in India of really these fundamental questions of who am I, why am I here, what is my purpose? You know, these are, you know, millennia old questions, but still, you know, we think that need to be kind of at the center of any kind of learning process and recognize. So the idea is not to fill people with, you know, in the Freudian sense of filling people, empty learners, with our content, but actually to starting with the questions and the search that each person has within them, and designing kind of co-designing with them a learning process that supports that thing. Couple of other, let me say a few things about Swaraj. So it's a 2-year program, and people come and we support them in designing their own journeys. And a few elements, one of them, and that is very important, is that community learning and collective decision making is a big part of that. So many of us, you know, in India, the tradition of joint families was very strong. In the last 50 years, it's started to diminish quite a bit. And I think looking at both models very closely, nuclear families and joint families, I'd say, it's one of the stupidest things that we've done is to destroy these joint family systems. And I see many experiments with trying to create new kinds of notions of family. Obviously, patriarchy and other such things were, maybe part of the reason why it started to deteriorate. But there are, thankful to say, there are many new kinds of experiments with trying to create joint families that are happening, which are part of our vision of learning. So what does it mean to live in community, and how do we create, collectively make decisions? So, we in the process, many people, many kinds of collective decision-making processes are experimented with, many forms of governance and decision-making, and many ways of what we would say when we talk about community. There's three interesting aspects we really try to look at. One is, how do we understand conflict? So most of us are taught conflict is to be avoided, or to be kind of bully your way through it, prove that you're right. But what if we could, or to be managed, conflict management you can see as a big domain. But what if we started to see conflict as a gift? What kind of pedagogies and approaches would we be able to create if we invited conflict and saw it as a gift to our learning? And the second thing is, what we try to explore in community is this idea of commons and commoning as a verb, that we are actively trying to step out of the domain of privatization. One of the philosophical traditions which I've looked into very deeply, Jainism and obviously Buddhism, both question very deeply this whole idea of ownership even, which is, I think it's very fundamental to the roots of capitalism and modernity. But what if we aren't owners of life? What would mean to me? Gandhi talked a lot about the idea of trusteeship. So what if we were not owners, and what if we started to let go of that fundamentally, and started to reclaim and rebuild a sense of the commons? I think that you probably are all familiar with also what was that? Hardin's work around tragedy of the commons. So that luckily many people have, including Eleanor Ostrom and others, have started, have really tried to debunk this idea that the commons is something that it is not really good for humanity. So that's the second thing, is a lot of experiments with commoning. And the third is this experiment with what we said, co-creation. So what does it mean to deeply enter into a process of co-creation? So a lot of, again, I said this idea of co-creation, and I would say collective intelligence. How do we access that collective intelligence? What does it move? Much of our domains of, let's say, creativity or intelligence have really been focused towards in the individual. So we tend to think, for example, creativity is an individualized process. Individual is the creator. But what if, when I looked into different traditions in India, for example, I met many artisans, and if you appreciate or admire their work and saying, "Oh wow, that's an amazing piece of pottery you've created," or "Great, amazing music you've created," their response across the country I've seen was, "We didn't create it." So we started to wonder, what does that mean when they say we don't create it? We're not the owners of it, and they say, that it's the divine energy flowing through us. We are just channels or medium for that. And we are, so I think this idea of stepping out of this, really seeing creativity and intelligence as individual properties, to starting to explore what does it mean when we create with others. And when I say others, maybe even beyond just humans, but what does it mean to co-create? We talk a lot about emplacement, replace and context. and other forms of life being essential to also our understanding ourselves in the world. So so this idea of community living is very important to this experiment. The couple of other things. How am I doing on time, David? 7 minutes more?
Yeah, sure. Yeah, about that. Okay. Yeah, pretty flexible. But yeah.
I hope everyone's okay. If there's questions, please put them in. I'm just trying to cover a lot. Sorry for that. So another element of Swaraj, I think we have a campaign that we started called Healing Ourselves from the Diploma Disease. So this idea of diplomas, so someone would have accused me, many people have said this to me, well, you went to Harvard, so your university doesn't give diplomas. Doesn't that keeps you on the top of the game, doesn't it? Because you have that degree from Harvard and that's privilege that you're owning. And yes, in a certain logic, in a certain worldview, there definitely is privilege, though my grandmother would never really was impressed or inspired by my Harvard degree, I have to say. And most people in indigenous communities are not impressed by it, but I recognize their privilege. And so what we've done is we have two things we've done in this campaign. One is we have over 1,000 faculty in our university, and majority of them have no degrees, but they are regarded as, masters of their field. So it could be a potter, it could be, we had, one of our learners decided to spend, he was very interested in marine conservation. He was learning he made his gurus or his mentors, he made them into, they were tribal fishermen. And so really tried to understand how do they see the river system and its connection to the ocean systems that they daily, engage with and live with. So many of these things, so these are not, people, we don't see it as, I think it's a fundamental shift. We are not trying to study those people. They're not, subjects of our study, which is at the university, but we actually are seeing them as very, as wisdom keepers, as whole people who are holding different traditions of knowledge. And so that's one side of it, is that of trying to recognize all of these people who have been, as I said, made invisible by the formal education system, called uneducated, called illiterate. So that's one side of it. And the other side is that we have really gone into many, more than I would say 1,500 organizations, companies, NGOs, social movements, and really tried to get them to remove the requirement for diploma and degrees from their hiring and promotion processes. And this is a way to really try to shift the game from a dependency on degrees, but actually saying that experience, your portfolio, your attitude, your passion, these are the things that actually are the things that we should be taking more note of, and that the degree actually doesn't really tell you anything. It's more of a very rudimentary, primitive, I would say, filtration system that has been created. And I could say much more about its racist and classist nature and all those things, but I think you already know that. So that's it. So that's the second thing. The third side of Swaraj I would just share is that we people come and there's this whole lineage of the guru disciple. So we've really tried to go deep into what does that lineage mean. And there's two things I would say, is that one is that there has been a tradition. There are people, guru cannot be imposed. So as something, unlike Western education, where the tradition of compulsion is kind of the dominant way of how the education system was set up, that if I went to Vijayata and I said, I'm your guru, and tomorrow you have to touch my feet and you have to follow what I say, she's already laughing and smiling. This is what majority of people would the response would be is that that's not how it works. There's a whole different tradition of mutuality that surrounds the guru-disciple tradition, which I think is very important to kind of go into and try to understand. And the second thing is the idea that a guru doesn't have to be human. So it opens up ourselves to, again, the more than human world. You know, a river can be your guru, a mountain can be your guru. And again, the people from India would know that there are many stories of people who the forest can be your guru, who actually were part of this kind of paradigm. The third element I just wanted to say was that there's a saying which I find very important, is the best guru never teaches you anything. So I think this is, again, a very important thing, that there's a tradition of obviously teaching, which is very, very much core to the, Western education system. But what if the best guru doesn't teach you? And the meaning of the word guru is actually not teacher, but it means source of inspiration. So so that's one more element, I think, that people actually, we really encourage them to, you know, find their gurus. And one other element I wanted to say about is that we have tried to, so we've made a distinction between what we call deadlyhoods and livelihoods. So part of the thinking is that the university schooling, factory schooling, and university, for the most part, has really led to careers which destroy the planet. And we can see that around the world, whether it's banking to finance the destruction, engineering to you know, create all kinds of mining and pollution and extraction industries, to psychology, which has been used for mass consumerism, you know, to law, which has been used to, you know, hide the worst crimes against the planet, to the military, obviously, which is to this day still used to steal, bomb innocent people and steal resources from them. So what we are calling for was a shift from deadlyhoods to actually a livelihood. So what are the careers, the work, the vocation that can actually make your spirit come alive, your community come alive again, and your ecosystems come alive? So I don't know if many of you are familiar with the whole work of the Sustainable Development Goals. So we've been quite critical of that as a framework. First, that sustainability it's not enough to sustain anymore. We need to move to a paradigm of regeneration because of the damage that has been so severe to biodiversity over the last century. We need to really think in very different ways about how we regenerate, whether it's the soil, the forests, the rivers, the oceans, life in general. And second, obviously, the Sustainable Development Goals is really geared. If you read the fine print, it's really about, you know, handing more power over to corporations in the name of public-private partnerships. So taking resources and power from communities and handing them into that. So what we're talking about really is this idea of livelihoods, which is, you know, and this is one other element of that is, you know, there is a lot of studies that have come out that, you know, 70-80% people hate their jobs. So after spending all these years and doing a lot of meaningless things in school and colleges, to come out of it and get into a position where you hate your job seems to be, you know, devastating for the human spirit. So what we what we're really thinking about is, you know, what our purpose in this earth is not to be a human resource, as you know. Indian Ministry of Education is called the Ministry for Human Resources Development. So how do we step out of that paradigm yeah, I know somebody's writing only 70 to 80%. If they wrote more, you know, there would be hopefully there would be a revolution. But yeah, I would, if you ask the question of how many people actually find what they're doing meaningful and regenerative to life on the planet, I think, you know, it would probably be less than 1% of people would answer. So it depends on how the question is framed. But anyway, so I think that's all I wanted to say about Swaraj. The last thing I just wanted to share is that we started, one thing is that there are no degrees or diplomas required, no certification required to enter Swaraj University. I think that is one of the major things that we've also, and there are no, so there is a whole tradition, again, philosophical tradition, which says that knowledge is not a commodity. And so there is no fees that are charged in Swaraj University. We ask learners to contribute in the spirit of gift culture and particularly towards the cost of their food and stay. But if that's not also possible, then, you know, we try to arrange other ways to support their learning. And when people leave, we don't ask them to pay back to us. We ask them to pay it forward and to kind of continue the cycle of the gift, the circle of the gift, which is very important. I don't know if you've read ever, you guys are familiar with the work of Lewis Hyde around the gift. It's also a very important piece. And we've really tried to go in and try to look at, again, different traditions around India of the gift culture. We have a book that we had edited many years ago called Reclaiming the Gift Culture, which there's a link on that on our website you can download from there. So where we led to this is about 5 years ago, we with many people around the world. We noticed Swaraj wasn't a isolated phenomena, but there was many bubblings around the world. And so we launched something called the Ecoversities Alliance. So right now there's more than 300 members in 40 countries of people who are really in this process of reimagining education in all kinds of different ways. And if you go to the website, you'll see, you know, one of the things that's really inspiring to me is really the forms and the shapes, the structures are so diverse. So you can find, you know, like people have started the forest versities, or the village versities, or the jail universities, or the farm versities. But the idea is that we can start to reclaim learning and different forms of knowledge and wisdom outside of the confines of the formal system, and somehow reconnect to a very different paradigm and worldview of life. So I invite you to look at this and to join us in this movement. Thank you so much, and look forward to questions and conversations.
Thank you so much, Manish. That was very, very interesting, inspiring. I'm desperate now to offer my foot massage services to anyone who fancies it. As soon as we're out of level 3, drop me an email. Yeah, no, it was. I've got loads of questions. Of course, people will have questions, so feel free to put the questions into the chat, or raise your hand, as you can do in various forms, and I and my colleagues will endeavour to keep an eye on that. While you're thinking about that, maybe I should ask a question, which is, I guess many of us here on the call today are probably working or have some association with sort of Western university culture, if I can put it broadly speaking, Western university culture, and sometimes we like to acknowledge the way in which that is a particular tradition, a historical tradition that isn't universal, although I think it's often presented as universal and becomes the academic culture rather than a academic culture. So I think that's something to keep in mind as we're working, is how we can keep telling the fact that we are just one way of engaging in theoretical or practical work. That's not really a question, is it? That's just a comment. Yeah, okay, maybe my question comes, I've got lots of them. I'll choose the one that relates to the last point you made, which is on the Ecoversities. And I've been really interested in the list and interested in the way it's developed. And I just wondered, you know, there are going to be institutions and traditions that question higher education culture within, you know, Paris, going back to May 1968 in Paris and across Europe. Different traditions of challenging, or I mean, I think in America there's all sorts of efforts to deconstruct or reconstruct higher education in all sorts of different forms. So I'm just wondering, from the perspective of the Ecoversities, what's the criteria for developing the particular approach that you've developed for that, beyond the fact that they're higher education institutions? I suppose institutions might not be the word, but maybe you could say a bit more about that.
Yeah, so I think that, you know, that's a really good question. There's lots of, as I said, there's a lot of diversity within the community. So lots of very beautiful live debates and discussions happening all the time. Obviously, there are different perspectives people feel, for example, around degrees, and you know, so some of the organizations have tried to do a formal degree granting thing, and it's a way that they, you know, seek to get more acceptance in terms of in terms of society. Many people also pursuing other kinds of approaches like badges or things like that, and then us, you know, ours is a total rejection of the degree diploma because we think it creates another form of social hierarchy which needs to really be looked at, and helps in the process of, I think, contributes to the process of commodifying knowledge. So there's a wide debate around it. I think even the debate around what is an ecoversity, what constitutes it, is also, we've purposely left it, I would say, vague. So it's really people who are sensing that there's a crisis in the way we framed higher education, as you were saying, as a universal model. So there are like many people these days, you know, talking about the pluriverse and multiverse and things like that. So people who realize that there is a need for a different understanding of diversity, even beyond what the Western, I would say, liberal canon has kind of proposed as diversity. So it has been more, but I think what would be some of the common things, that there's an understanding also of the limitations of the kind of rational, we've kind of hit the limitations of the rational, linear, fragmented mind. And there is a certain, you know, I think, obviously, you know, I just had a eye surgery several months ago, and so there's no denying that, you know, this has contributed in certain ways to helping human beings, this form of knowledge. But I think what's concerning is, you know, what's the long-term costs of it, and what's the limitations of it? Are we even conscious of the limitations, you know? And whether it's, you know, and I think, you know, particularly the whole scientific paradigm, there's science and technology. I think we are drawn into this, you know, utopian narrative of technology will solve all our problems, with very little actually skepticism and exploration around that. So I think, you know, so people who are questioning some of these things and understanding the limits of them are you know, joining, and also people who are trying to really explore other ways of knowing. So I was saying, you know, in placement, the knowledge that comes with, you know, with land and with oceans and rivers and forests and things, and that if there is an understanding that we are not separate, and that these other beings there's a consciousness, aliveness, intelligence, even I would venture to say communication that is happening. How do we start to reclaim those understandings and ways of knowing. The second, would be what we call embodiment. So again, one of the things I've been really looking at, so the roots, all of us know the roots of schooling, the word school is leisure. So I think, one of the things I've been just working on is to actually that we need to kind of almost really look at what do we mean by leisure. Is it, I was watching this video which was actually questioning, the whole capitalist consumerist dream, but at the end of the video, the good life is still somebody, was somebody sitting on a beach sipping their pina coladas with a brown or black native serving them. So, what is our paradigm of leisure, and how do we understand knowledge as being constructed is, I think, one of the questions we need to really deeply delve into. And what does it mean when we say our bodies are also having intelligence, or, work also creates an opportunity for a different way of understanding and meaning. And obviously, how do we define work is another whole question mark, and how has it been defined in modernity is a very different thing than, again, many other knowledge traditions would have seen it. So I think this idea of also the wisdom of our body, and also then, knowledge that comes from the heart is also something very, very critical. So traditions of compassion and service, how do these help create different traditions of knowledge? I was at I don't know if you're familiar about this. Last year, this farmers movement started, and there's a massive protest that's been happening in Delhi against these farm laws. But I went to this protest for a day, and I came away, and a lot of the site I was at of the protest was very much driven by people who were tied to the Sikh philosophical tradition. And there's one element of their tradition, again, many Indians would have known about this, called langar, which is kind of a community kitchen, and which puts service at the center. And I saw that I came away and I wrote a little bit about this, that this was, I called it the abundance revolution. So moving us out of, when we tap into the knowledge around that's tied traditions to the heart, and to compassion, and to service, and to trust, again, it opens up a whole different framework to help us step out of this, scarcity that gets bred into us. One of the things I think everyone here probably has played musical chairs, which I think is one of the most nefarious games that you could have children play. What does it teach you? That there's one scarce chair, and you have to bite and claw your way. You can do anything to your friend to grab that chair. And this is somehow the construction of the entire global financial capitalist paradigm is on this model. And so how do we step out of that kind of scarcity tradition into a different one? So I think that many of the groups which are creating ecoversities or renaming themselves as ecoversities are doing it. And there's obviously a politics which drives this. It's a politics of which is whose knowledge matters and which knowledge matters. And today, even all over the world, a person who has in India, let's say a government official who's only there because they were able to crack a lot of exams, has more power over tribal fishermen or indigenous people around what should happen to their forest or their sacred lands, just because they have a degree which is claiming for them to be more knowledgeable, even though they have no knowledge about those lands or those rivers or whatever the quote unquote resources they're making decisions over. So I think this question of whose knowledge matters is one, and who actually, when I talk a lot about in our explorations of decolonization, this question of one of the things I say is that the people who control the definitions or the maps or the indicators, they're the ones who control the game. So part of the ecoversities, the politics is that, can we open these definitions up for inquiry. Whereas in the last, few hundred years, they were never open. We were just told that here's your chance. The development paradigm says, now you get a chance to run the race, even though we'll define all the rules and the frameworks and all of that. So this is a little bit about it, but we've kept it purposely vague because I think the times that we live in probably demand us to be a little bit more messy than what we've been trained to do.
Thank you, Manish. There's quite a few questions in a
Yeah.
row. So let's go ahead. I think Pia, you had your hand up a few minutes ago. Pia, did you want to ask your question?
Yeah, I have two questions. The first one is Manish's system replicates the old Gurukul system which used to exist in India before everything happened, the evolution, the revolution happened in India. It used to be Gurukul system. Because I'm researching in education, so I've been looking around what has been in education in other countries. So I come across this idea that there used to be something called Gurukul system. The kids from the rich family who have a family will be living with the teacher in the house, and they will be working to help them. And that's how they were getting educated, and that's how they will develop all the key skills. That's my first part of the question. So does your system replicate that? Secondly, considering everything need to be accredited to some kind of thing to get a job, will you go forward and you will create your own qualifications so that when your students or your educators go into the community, they are in a place that they can actually, even though it's a piece of paper indicating that they got this degree or this qualification, can compete with the job market? I hope that makes sense.
Yeah, so thanks so much for those questions, Pia. So one thing I would say is that there is no Gurukul system in the sense that we would want to say that is, highly organized, centralized, logical, in the sense. So this idea I would say, people who have tried to call the Gurukul as a system are basically, it's a product of the schooled mind, which would like to, again, try to put everything into neat categories and boxes and try to say that, okay, there's actually, what I'm trying to say, there is a certain kind of philosophical tradition. And this is, again, there are contradictions and paradoxes even in that tradition. But we've tried to go and try to, in a sense, recover some what we would find some wisdom in that philosophy, but again, what I'm saying, a lot of people translate guru and teacher for the same thing. So what I fundamentally challenge that translation, for example, and the sense that there was no central board deciding what all the gurus should teach or how they should do it or what does that mean. All of that things we need to, that's what I'm saying. Our schooled mind we need to be very conscious of it when we're going back and looking at it. There was a interesting, again, this is something particularly for people who have a background from India. There's a historian, Dharampal, who went through about 20,000 pages of British records to try to uncover what was how was education actually happening in India just when the British had arrived? What was really happening? And his findings are amazing and shocking and mind-blowing. And I'm just giving you the trailer so you go and look for yourself. I won't really reveal, but it's really. But when my critique of his work, though I was quite inspired, is that again it's looking, what the British were able to understand or make sense of a very complex, nuanced kind of practices and processes and ways that were. So what closely resembled whatever they could understand a school, that's what they documented, and that's what they started calling the Gurukul system. But actually, the one has to look at many different kinds of things and different records, different stories, narratives to try to unpack and uncover what that actually was, and where some of the key wisdom or philosophical underpinnings of that. And that's what we've tried to do in that. Yeah, so that's my way. So I would again encourage you to question the idea of anyone saying there was a system there, but definitely a kind of a code of ethics maybe, or something. And even this is great, you gave me, there's one other thing I would recommend you to look at. So my story actually starts 4,000 years ago, more than 4,000 years ago, which is with our first guru is who we call Eklavya, which is a story from the Mahabharata, who was this tribal boy who wanted to become an archer, and he was denied by a very respected person, Dronacharya, at that time. And so he is the first, I think, one of the first documented stories of self-designed learning. So he was driven from a paradigm of what I would call intrinsic motivation. So if there is something, the guru-disciple paradigm would be geared towards understanding intrinsic motivation. Whereas, we see again, much of the way the whole factory system of education has been set up is really around reward and punishment, external forms of motivation. So yeah, so there's a lot to unpack in that, but I would love to, share more about this with you in the future.
Thank
and
you.
what was the second thing? Sorry, I missed the second one you were raising.
So are you going to create some kind of, is it called accredited? Are you going to create some kind of accredited thing?
So what I'm saying is we personally, for our projects, we're challenging the paradigm of accreditation and what it means. And that's two challenges. One is that, most of what I'm saying, that the whole paradigm of getting people into jobs, we have to challenge that, because those jobs are part of a system of deadlyhoods. And so I think there's a different exploration that is needed there that, and second is that, what we are trying to do is really look at a different understanding of economy, which would be really more grounded in what we call localization. So what does it mean to rebuild your local economy? Most of the global economy is built on depleting and stealing the real wealth away from local economies or local communities. And so what we're really trying to do is, and our system is really building that, so as I'm saying, some people around the Ecoversities still are going back to more classic forms of accreditation. We are actually trying to push the edges of that, and where it might open us up to new kinds of relationships.
Thank you. There's as I say, lots of other questions. So I'm going to see if Swati wants to ask. I think she has a couple of questions actually. Swati, if you're there, do you want to ask your questions? If not, I can try and ask for you.
Hi.
Oh,
there's so many of them. I was just trying to figure out where is my question gone. It's like completely lost. So just from the last discussion that you just had with Pia, and you spoke about the fact that you don't want to sort of push yourself towards accreditation and sort of qualifications and things like that. So my question was then, how do you measure success in these programs that you were talking about, that you have this university program, which is about 2 years long? So how do you measure success? And so if you say that a student has actually gone through the program, is that all?
Yeah. So I think it's a different tradition. I think what we, so there's a whole question back at you, Swati, is why do you want to measure that? And obviously that has a lot of political and implications, I would say, around power and who's measuring and for what purposes, and right. So that's one side of it.
Yeah, that was my second question, because it all comes from the fact that we want to become owners of something. We want to be accepted in the society, and that takes us back into the commercialization of education. That was my second question. So how does this type of system of education get accepted in a wider context? So if I would want to make a change in what I see now, how would you bring about that change? Because everything is, you judge it by the fact whether it is successful or it's not successful, or it is a failure or not a failure. Yeah. So how do you change that? It's so difficult to change that mindset.
Yeah. So that's obviously a big unlearning question. And I think that's a really good one to, engage with. I think just in terms of how we frame our program, we see it as it's not a graduation or a completion, the 2 years. It's actually an initiation. So again, drawing from a lot of other traditions so you don't go through and you don't complete something. You actually are initiated to really start a journey. And this is, the tradition of being a koji or seeker is a totally different kind of tradition. It's not like you consume something and you actually have to. So these are just some little, I would just say it's an initiation. So that requires then a different kind of way to understand even what's actually happening in this part of an initiation, And so, as I said, a lot of the what we offer a lot in this is, for example, a lot of unlearning invitations. So there's nothing compulsory in the program, but they're invitations. And for example, we have one which has become very, well known. It's called the Cycle Yatra. So it's a cycle pilgrimage on bicycles, where we invite people for a week to travel into rural areas without any money, without any food, without any technologies, like phones and cameras and all that, and without any medicines and without any planning. To just it's an exercise in a different tradition of, philosophical tradition, I would say, of surrendering, and to, engage with their fears around, particularly one of the things that schooling does, I've done phenomenally around the world, is to fill us all with a lot of fear around money and both planning, so much that you probably have seen in many conferences, people want to know a minute-to-minute account what's going to happen beforehand. It's almost absurd, the kind of planning that traditions that get created with this illusion of control. So so we have all of these different kinds of invitations, and people go through, and they're different way invitation. Following these experiences really do invite them to reflect that. So much of our notion around failure and success. So one thing that we do at the end of the year, 2 years, is really to ask people to really reflect on what those failures were, and let's celebrate them. Let's try to switch the narrative around what failure actually means, or even what success actually means. So it's really trying to, play in a lot of different ways to spending. I think, and as I said earlier, this whole idea that we can measure success, there's a certain absurdity to the whole thing, which very few people have, spend the time to look at, but that we have 2 years of time. Even, I would say there's a lot of, one of the interesting things, which was for me part of this, the kind of unlearnings, was really, how do we, people come and, on surface, it seems like they're doing nothing. They're just chilling. They just, despite invitations, despite brainstorming with them, despite all kinds of things, they just want to chill. And we've kind of understood it as, people being driven their whole lives in a kind of rat race machine, and then getting a chance to, and needing to detox and deal with, the trauma, the burnout, all of those things that happen. And so even this idea of doing nothing, we've had to re-look at what it actually means. Are they really doing nothing? Or is there something more profound that what we can understand that is happening. The wisdom of the body and is taking its own, is getting a chance to reclaim some space in our lives again, and things like that. So I think that's there's a lot of these things, these notions again, that we're trying to create a space to really reflect and try to relook at. And I'm not saying we have all the answers, but I think the questions, the whole idea of the project of Swaraj University and the Ecoversities is actually to, there's a friend of mine she was a minister of culture in West Africa, in Mali. And she once said this, said that we are facing both in the global south and the global north, 500 years of the systematic rape of our imaginations, which was, this. I almost 20 years ago I heard this. It still gives me goosebumps talking about it. But whenever I say it, but if we really understand the profound nature of that, what a project like Swaraj is really trying to do is to give us space to recover an imagination, to not only ask a different set of questions, but actually to commit our bodies, our lives, our hearts to actually trying to live out a different story. That's the experiment, and that's the invitation. And I think what I've seen in a very humble way that, so the project is not only limited to the learners who come and join us, the Kojis, but it's actually a project for the larger subcontinent and obviously the world to invite a different imagination into play and a different kind of experimentation. So that's what the game is actually, is that we're not trying to replicate this or mainstream this, but it's actually to open up. I talk about, if there's 1 billion human beings in India, we need to actually think about what would a system that would accommodate 1 billion learning systems, what would they look like? How could they coexist and nurture each other? That's the imagination we're trying to invoke, in a sense, and Swaraj is just one platform for that. And the Ecoversities Alliance says that there's many, many ways, and so we're not trying to be at all prescriptive, I think, but it's actually more of an invitation and a dialogue that we're imagining with this project.
Thank you so much, Manish. I think I'm going away with a lot of questions in my mind, which I think is the right way to sort of, go away from this kind of session. Loved it. Thank you.
Yeah. Thank you so much, Swati. Yeah.
Thank you. Yeah, we may end up going away from this session with lots of questions unasked.
Yeah, if I've confused you, David, then it's a good day's work.
Exactly. So Kerry, Kerry's next on the list of questions. Kerry, would you like to come forward and ask your question?
Oh, yeah. Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Sorry, you can't see me. Hi, so I just wanted to say thank you for sharing, Manish. It's really inspiring and thought-provoking. And just the last thing that you said when you finished speaking was about the Eco-University being an opportunity to reclaim learning, knowledge and wisdom that's outside of the confines of the current system. And I was just wondering what your thoughts are on trying to actualize this while still operating within the confines of the present educational environments?
Yeah, good question. So we have, this again is a good ongoing dialogue. I mean, so there's I can give you the optimistic side and also the depressing side, because both have gone. The depressing side, I think I referred to earlier. I was on that path of could it happen within the system in my 20s when I tried to reach all of these major centers of power, and I came away with a resounding no, that it's not going to happen from there. And also, I thought about the kind of radical changes that are needed in the imagination and the work that's needed to create new models. there's this classic framing of, there are book smart people and street smart people. So who do you think is really, would you put your money on? So I thought, part of my reason for leaving that world, was that I think I decided I'll put my money on the street smart people. And, so the people who are failures, or, one project I'm involved with now is the jail university. So it's really reimagining the prison as an ecoversity, and jail inmates as in the tradition of Gandhi and Mandela and many others, as new kinds of social leaders that can emerge in the world today. So I think that at the same time, in the Ecoversities Alliance, we have members who are you could say renegades, rebels, or reimaginers who are sitting within the mainstream classical universities and have departments, or have teams or projects that they're trying to do within that. So I think I don't want to be I don't want to I think that we need all kinds of experiments, is what I would say at this time. And so people are doing that, and those alliances. Maybe if you had asked me this 10 years ago, I would have said, you guys are all wasting your time in the university, and you can realize it now, or you can come and see me in 10 or 20 years and tell me I was right. But I think at this stage of my life, I would say that we need all kinds of alliances and imaginations to come together to get out of the mess that we're in, and to create a different kind of game. How's that sound to you, Carrie?
Yes, thank you so much. I'll come and see you as soon as possible. Thank you.
Great. Okay, so we've got about 5 minutes. We'll probably use a few more than that, and we've got at least 5 questions. So just to give you a sense of where we're at. But Mark, I know you've been commenting and questioning. Is there a question you'd like to ask right now?
Well, I'm trying to come from the other side, because everything Manish is saying is totally speaks to my heart. But I am interested in those elements of education and learning, especially kind of advanced scientific kind of methods. I'm going to the dentist tomorrow, and I'm kind of like that dentist, even if they don't have a certificate on the wall, to definitely know what they were doing when they were going to play about with my teeth. So while I totally agree in terms of the way that knowledge is being sort of captured and commodified, but there's also I'm interested in your thoughts on how we, in areas where we need to build on previous knowledge that is there and have some kind of more refined way of learning skills, how does that work within the eco-university system?
Yeah, so I don't think I'm anti-skills at all. Actually, I think that there's actually another word. There's a lot of things. I mean, Hindi, people who know Hindi might be able to help me, but there's another word called hunar, which exists in, and I've tried to delve deep into part of our project has been really reclaiming a lot of understanding behind our own words, which had been co-opted. I have also friends who are doing that in their indigenous languages around the world. There's also people in Arabic doing that. But a lot of this, so Vijayata was saying talent, skill, but hunar has an element of wisdom also to it. And I think it's more than a skill. It's skills, relationships, and wisdom, which come together. And so what I'm trying to say is that we need to, let me put it a couple of different ways, because it's a really important question you're asking, Mark. And so, as I said earlier, discounting certain kinds of advancements that have made and their ability to at least benefit. What I would want to do is place that within a larger tradition to ask first, what are the costs of that? And I think that is a really, if we go into that, it's a really scary discussion where very few people want to really engage in. I use a metaphor sometimes of, you know, bodybuilders on steroids.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, they don't look like David for sure. But, you know, the paradigm of steroids, what you see is that, you know, what do you see happening? As people pump up their bodies, you know, look amazing, these kind of really muscular things. But what is happening internally in somebody who's pumped up many years on steroids? We find that all their internal organs are, you know, are collapsing, are, you know, deteriorating, right? So what we are looking at is a situation where, you know, all of these so-called achievements, what we've seen of the last century, we have probably hit the point where, you know, we are starting to see actually and noticing the interior, the inner organs and the collapse that's happening to them and the implications of that. And so I think that's part of the conversation that has to happen. The second thing in that conversation that has to happen is, you know, so the thing that's happened, whether it's engineering or it's medicine, what has been done is that these have become the philosophical aspect has been very carefully and surgically removed from all of these domains. So the idea that doctors or healers were first philosophers is no longer the case, right? We don't look to with the people healing us as that, you know, that they have actually spent years in a deep kind of philosophical inquiry around self and around the human, the non-human world, and, you know, or more than human world. That those kinds of inquiries, you know, and this is, I'm saying this as having a mother who is hardcore into the Western allopathic paradigm and growing up with doctors in that paradigm. So it's not just a kind of casual thing, but the kind of philosophical questions, whether it's, you know, around genetically modified food or seed monoculture or, you know, nuclear weapons or all of these kinds of things. You don't see medical doctors really ever questioning these things much. Or involved. Maybe once in a while you do, but I think the idea is that the knowledge, the kind of the need is to really reconstruct a different kind of philosophical tradition again to situate these knowledges into, and which is not you know, inherently fragmented. So the fragmentation has served to some extent in the short run. The long run, I think fragmentation is creating things like, you know, climate emergency and all kinds of things which we have no idea. And in our work and with many of our friends, you know, we're saying our way of thinking, the schooled mind, is part of the crisis. You know, the way we think about the crisis is part of the crisis. And so I think that's the invitation that. In a very humble way, how do we actually start to relook at these knowledge traditions and invite them to be, you know, I think anyways, this whole thing is going to shift with two things. One is the more we understand about the more than human world, because I think that Western science traditions have really messed up how we see non-human intelligence or the beyond human intelligence that is totally, you know, the Western science is very primitive in its understanding of that. And the second is, if, you know, the more, you know, all the other encounters, you know, with which might be the, you know, more than this planet, beings beyond this planet, if that would change the traditions and the ways we see knowledge radically also. So, and the third thing is that a lot of even modern science's discovery rests on the back of indigenous peoples. Even today, around 60 to 70% of modern medicine discoveries is on the back of knowledge, plants and knowledge that indigenous people have been having for a long time. So if that tradition, I would also invite, there needs to be a different level of honesty, you know, this knowledge theft that has happened within that tradition, and hierarchy and all of those things. I think the invitation is for coming clean around those that is needed if we can form genuine partnerships with between these different knowledge traditions. How's that, Mark?
It's a really good partial answer.
Yeah. I have 5 minutes to answer. It's the best I can do.
Thanks very much, Manish. Cheers.
Yeah.
Actually, Manish, you had 1 minute, and you.
Oh, okay.
That's okay.
I rejected Western notions of time a long time ago. Yeah.
Those of us who still inhabit the temporal realm may have to leave, but perhaps we can just keep an eye on the questions and thank everybody for the questions. I'm really sorry that we haven't been able to get to all of them.
I would suggest one thing, David, either you read them or
I'll read them.
Yeah,
I'll read
them in so they become part of the conversation.
Right,
you know,
right. As long as you don't answer them, we'll be fine. So Amel was asking, in modern societies, we move around due to war, economic and political reasons, which results in diverse and complex societies. How would it be possible to insert indigenous knowledge in the curriculum, which is white and hegemonic? That's a great question. Now there's more questions if I've lost them. Sorry? Gordon. Oh, Gordon. Yeah, Gordon. Gordon's got a big question. Could you return to where we started and unlearning? Can we understand unlearning as central to processes of moving beyond, that search for and building of transformative alternatives? For instance, the urgent necessity of moving beyond the hegemonic order of things, unlearning as an essential starting point or foundation for moving beyond capitalism, beyond the state, labor, identities, etc., institutions and categories of and that serve capitalism and thus oppression, repression, and exploitation. Very good question. Another one from Amel, how do we get communities to reclaim power?
Sarah has asked for some recommendations on books on how she can find rivers and mountains as gurus. So any stories or any reading material on that?
Yeah, and Katya gives us something else to think about. Something I find difficult to think is the relationship between our concepts of change and our understanding of educational practice. That is the difficulty, challenge in mapping the messy processes and dynamics of relationships and transformations in education that I'm sure often also reproduce, even if inadvertently, the dynamics of capitalism, but also rupture it simultaneously onto our concepts of alternative education. Is there a danger if we are too pure in pitting paradigms, education versus alternative education, capitalism versus its alternatives against each other, perhaps as a Western Enlightenment desire for conceptual purity? Hope that makes sense. Mm-hmm. So those are lots of questions that will hang in the virtual space. I don't know if you want to try put them in a nutshell, one word answer to everything, please, Manish, if you don't mind.